Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Feel Good for Men Who Want Change, the podcast for those who feel left out or left behind and want to grow. We explore, as you know, healthy masculinity through open and honest conversations that don't preach or shame, but really invite reflection and action. Now, in this episode, we're exploring a topic that you might have seen in the headlines or heard on Instagram, which is that of the Manosphere and how men can get sucked into it and what we need to do to stop that happening. I'm speaking with Will Adolphy, a BACP registered psychotherapist and coach and Managing Director of MPath, which is a schools-based organization that helps students, staff, and parents navigate masculinity, mental health, and emotional literacy through talks and workshops. And Will has recently advised the Prime Minister and Health Secretary on the men's health strategy. And you'll hear us refer quite a lot to a film and some research that was done. And that was part of Movember's groundbreaking masculinity research project, all of which will be included in the show notes. Now, as you'll hear, Will shares a lot about his own journey, how he slipped into the manosphere, how it's so compelling, actually, and how part of the challenge with it is that it gives young boys and men what they need, but ultimately leads them down darker paths of misogyny and harm. He's doing a lot of the work now that we need to happen to stop that being the case for all of us moving forward and our sons, and I'm sure you'll take a lot from him. He's doing a lot of preventative work these days to ensure that young boys who are growing up in the online world can avoid some of the traps that he fell into. And as you'll hear, there's a lot of hope for those boys that they can find an emotional connection that perhaps evaded some of us. So tune in, enjoy, and let me know what you think. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. And look, I mean, there's loads to go after, and people will have heard in the intro a bit about your work, which we'll come on to. But I guess before we talk about the topics that are covered in the film and the work you're doing now, tell us a bit about your upbringing. Like, where did you grow up? What shaped your sense of masculinity in those formative years?
Grew up in Surrey, and I think James Bond comes to mind when you say what shapes masculinity.
Yeah.
Was obsessed with the James Bond films and used to kind of wear a tuxedo, gallivant around the kitchen, screaming chicken, not sird, ding, 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 all of that
very good.
really had me hooked. And it's hard to really know, isn't it? Still looking back, still getting curious, like to know fully where I learned the messages about what it means to be a man, because a lot of it flies under the radar, I think, of my conscious mind. That's a notable one. And then obviously my dad, seeing my dad so distant at work deals, on the phone, feeling the stress. My mum being at home the whole time as a housewife and a mum, and being so immersed in kind of taking care of us, doing everything for me, ironing, cleaning my bed, cooking me food. These are the things that come up when you say that. And then I think about how I was when I was 9 years old, like this kind of sensitive soul, still am, of course, writing poetry, wanting to give to charity, just very sensitive to the world around me and warm-hearted. And then how that evolved as I remember being around sort of 13, 14, and perhaps that sensitivity making me an easy target, but just feeling the wrath of judgment at school, not necessarily fitting into what I now see as a box. And what can happen when we don't fit in? I was a kind of in-betweener, I'd say. So I had one foot in the box, doing my best to adhere to it, and one foot out where I felt, I did ballet. I wanted to be an actor, drama kid. And at some point, I unknowingly felt, in order to get ahead, in order to survive, in order to not be so impacted by what was happening, because I was so deeply impacted. And I remember one key moment, actually, my mum, I haven't had this chat with her yet. I will talk to her about this, because we have a lot more open relationship these days. But at the end of a bed, I was crying, and she really did her best to try and support me. She could see that I was struggling so much at school with what was happening. And she said, "You care too much. Try not caring so much." And I don't blame her for this. That's what she knew, got passed on to her. She was trying to support me the best way she knew. But from that moment on, I became the whatever, I don't care man. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do that, mum. Something would happen, yeah, whatever. I don't care. I don't care. And there's still a moment or two as a 31-year-old today, where the whatever I don't care guy comes up,
Yeah, yeah.
occasionally, right? Whatever, I don't care. And I go, something's going on here. You do care about something. And he's like, no, what do you mean? No, I don't care. And it's like, yes, something's happening.
Yeah.
But does that resonate with you as well? That kind of whatever I don't care guy stuff?
Yeah, 100%. A lot of what you just said resonates with me. I mean, look, the reality is when we say that, we do care. Otherwise, we wouldn't say it, right? And so there's an instant problem of, of covering and burying something. That absolutely resonates with me. And look, I mean, this isn't about me, but I had a similar conversation, but with my dad, actually, when he left. My parents are divorced. And when I was a young boy, he said, "You're the man of the house now." And I absorbed that, right? And that was my version of that. And I think, the emotional maturity that many men have often can be traced back to something, someone, some collection of formative moments when we were young boys.
Yeah. And that pressure, you're the man now, don't care too much. It's all for me, it's like, how can I stand up and perform?
Mm,
That's kind of what I feel now. I look back and I think, oh yeah, it was about putting on a face. It was about pretending to be someone I'm not. And I did a lot of that. I did because I felt like I needed to in the environment I was in. And there were some tough times. There was some, school. I look back at school. I was with my school friends the other day, and they were saying how much they love school, and I'm like, it's difficult for me to talk about because yes, there were moments that I have such fondness of. There's nothing quite like a group of friends that I had, that sense of feeling like a family with my friends. That's something that I remember fondly. And at the same time, I just remember such deep emotional pain and loneliness and sadness. And yeah, there was a lot going on. I mean, I had 19 surgeries by the time I was 12. So I had
wow.
medical trauma as well. I also come from a divorced family. So there was a lot of alienation at home. I moved into I asked my dad and my mum if I could move into his old office at the end of our garden, which became the kind of love shack, quote unquote. But yeah, in truth, it was me masturbating, gaming, and
Yeah.
smoking weed in that
Yeah.
den. And that's what I did. I kind of alienated myself. And I always tell this story just to try and give people an understanding of how dissociated I was from reality. I always just used to go in my room and just do my own thing and hide from my life because that's how I coped. And this is when I was 14 to kind of 18. I was in this room. And one day when I'm 17, I think it is, my parents have just separated and we're going out for a dinner with my dad and my brother and my sister. And my brother is talking. So he must have been about 15 at that time. And he's talking about going to Reading Festival, I think, because it's at that time. And I look at him in the eyes as he's speaking. And I have one of the most surreal moments because I'm looking at this boy and I haven't looked at him in the eye for years.
Mm,
And he's grown up. So one part of my brain is going, this is my brother. And the other part of my brain is going, this is a stranger. I don't know who this is
mm,
because I hadn't looked at him in the eye. I hadn't connected with him. I hadn't said a word to him. I hadn't been in his presence in the way I was. And that just really shocked me when I thought about that. I was like, wow, I really did retreat because that felt like the best option at the time. And I needed to do it to survive. But of course, I now know that it led to a whole host of emotional problems as I got into my late teens, as I got into my early 20s. And that left me in a very vulnerable state.
And we'll come on to, I guess, because one thing I'm interested in is how your work now allows you to reflect back on your own upbringing and time in school. But at that point, did you then sort of go to university, into the world of work? And what was the transition from there into, I guess, the topic of our conversation, your transition into the online world of the manosphere?
Yeah, I mean, so in my early 20s, late teens, I kind of was watching a lot of online content. That's when a masculinity influencer became a father figure to me, and I went down a kind of red pill route and definitely had that whole experience, which I'm sure we can go into. But then, so I did go to university, and that kind of happened after university, and then just reached a point of complete desperation by the time I was about 26, where I had a breakup. And a breakup in a relationship is often a point of crisis that so many men, we don't see it as an opportunity. We see it as a tragedy, as the end of the
Mm,
world at the time. It can really feel like that, but it's actually one of the greatest opportunities that we have. And the way I describe this is I now see the initiation into emotional maturity or manhood as leaving the village of comfort. That's the first step. And the village of comfort for me was gaming addiction. It was my girlfriend at the time, who I had unconsciously projected as a mother object, someone to save me from my loneliness that I mentioned earlier as a kid, just the deep loneliness I had. It's so common in our culture to develop this idea that there is a woman or another person, might be a man, depends which way you're inclined, that will save us from the predicament we're in, that will soothe the deep loneliness that we have inside. And it's the same as addiction. Addiction is kind of a substitute for that as well. Gaming, just easing that unease, that loneliness. Alcohol as well. I went for a period of, weed, drugs, all of these sorts of things were my village of comfort. And there was no guidance that was helping me on a path towards emotional maturity on an embodied level. So I remained very stuck in the village. And of course, within our culture, there's a lot of companies profiting of keeping people stuck in the village as well. So it's not as simple, and there's little guidance. So it's not a simple thing, because the other stories around me at that time, what I was consuming online, which was essentially making it seem very tangible and prescriptive, go to the gym to get big and ripped, build a business into a huge success, find an attractive girlfriend, and you will feel better about yourself. And on the one hand, that was true for the briefest moment in time. And on the other, it actually didn't build my self-worth up. So in the long run, I ended up getting swept away from an eventual storm, a challenge, and I felt like I was back to square one. So yeah, that started to happen when I was 26. I found that route to emotional maturity through a recovery program. I put down the comforts, turned away from my girlfriend at the time for the first time ever towards facing myself and feeling the feelings and doing something which initially felt feminine, quote unquote, but has been the bravest, most courageous thing I think I've ever done and have ever witnessed people do, because I'm fortunate now that I spend a living witnessing people face themselves. And my goodness, every time it happens, it's like the first time it's happened. It really is something.
Yeah, well, and kudos to you for doing that, because I guess part of the perniciousness of where you found yourself was, I can imagine from the outside in, a lot of the things that you were soothing yourself with were ironically socially acceptable, right? Oh, I go out for a drink, I smoke a bit of weed, I play a bit of computer games, and well, I guess one, people don't know the extent to which you're doing those things, and two, from the outside, those are all relatively innocuous pastimes.
Yeah, I mean, I had to examine my relationship to those things because I'd reached a breaking point, because I couldn't tolerate how unhappy I was anymore. So I stopped coping and ended up descending. And lots of people, particularly men, we cling on to cope and not hit rock bottom because we really don't want to accept how unhappy we are. And this is universal, I think, as well, because it's hard to let that in, to really fully acknowledge how deeply unhappy I was one of the most freeing things I've ever experienced. I remember calling up my mum and going, I'm so unhappy. And she was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was like, no, this is like, I feel relieved because now I can do something about it. Now I feel motivated. And this is the thing I've learned about negative emotions, quote unquote, which is that they carry so much wisdom and guidance in them. And I had done my absolute best to I was externalizing my attention the entire time, because that's what we get taught to do. And there's so many things pulling away our attention, but internalizing my attention and building a relationship with myself has been what has allowed me to now step into the arena and do something that is incredibly scary still, sharing my story with the world, with schools, young men, going online, releasing things, having people challenge me, having people get triggered by what I'm saying. And these sorts of conversations, it's like, God, I'm terrified. Like, but part of me really doesn't want to do it. Part of me wants to go back to the village. I'm still feeling that. But I have enough confidence or assurance in myself, self-worth in myself, which has been developed through this whole process, that allows me to not feel so wobbled and overwhelmed by shame. And I'm so grateful for that, because it means that I can get involved in the conversation and hopefully be of use.
Yeah, and I'm sure you are. And in that vein of thinking, is there a sort of practice or intervention point where when young men are in their formative years, you can sort of find them at the fork in the road, and instead of going down the path that you went down, they can go down another. I guess what I'm asking is there something that we can name and point to that is missing for men who end up in that place that we can start to address much earlier on?
One word comes to mind. I mean, connection.
Uh,
I think from a very young age, we treat girls differently and we treat boys differently. There's studies done, a mother in the, baby in the womb, if it's a boy, the words used, the way in which we respond is already starting that socialization from before that baby's even been born into the world. Yeah, that messaging of kind of disconnection from, as a boy, disconnecting from my feelings, I think that starts to happen roughly around the age of probably about, you could say 10, 11, and then obviously grows more and more as you get. Most boys, if you think back to when you were 7 years old, the best mate that you had, and I wonder if this is the same for you, but the closest I've ever felt, and obviously it's changing as I go through this process currently, but was my best mate back then, Joe, 7 years old. We just, the closeness emotionally I felt to this boy, it breaks my heart in some ways, because at some point that became no homo, right? No
yeah,
homo. And there was
yeah,
this thing,
yeah.
like, no homo, bro. And slowly but surely, and then when we get into kind of 13s, the teens, 14, you can start to feel and see notable mask wearing and bravado. I'm not saying every boy does this. I definitely did it. And I see it in every school I go into,
Yeah,
every
yeah,
school, right?
yeah. Agreed. Yeah, I think most people, particularly people who've grown up in the UK, will recognize, in if not them, the men they grew up around, some version of that for sure.
Yeah. And so we can think of that as the man box. And have you heard it? I'm sure you've heard of possibly the man box, that idea of the box, this kind of rigid sense
Yeah.
of masculinity. Yeah, it holds all the rules that we may feel we need to follow. And when we think of it as kind of like this ideal that we're still collectively socializing boys and men in, it really helps me to understand that it's a culture that still exists and is still getting reinforced. And I still see that at schools. But that initial, what we're experiencing, that closed offness or that bravado, that can be scary to people. It could be scary to other boys in the year. It could be scary to teachers, particularly female teachers. It's scary to parents, scary to people walking by on the street. People get scared of groups of men, groups of boys. And I feel that now when I'm walking around in a group of men. I have this kind of awareness. I'm like, wow, what's this like for other people? Because they don't know us. They don't
Yeah.
know that I know these guys, I know we're safe, but they don't know that. And so if I raise my voice, what's that like? And, it's just, for me, that starts very early. And disconnection is one of the consequences of this, disconnecting from my emotions like I did, whatever, I don't care. That's me disconnecting from the parts of me that I'm denying now because they don't feel accepted in the world. My grief, my sadness, my fear, somewhere along the line, we get the message that that's not wanted, or that can't be dealt with in the world. So it's that cut off. So what do we need? Well, we need to model letting those parts in without losing what we're afraid to lose, which could be what some people call masculinity, right? This sense of, I feel like I have to exchange one for the other. And so my work at school, when our work for MPath, the company I run, is to model that. So we're there to literally say, hey, I can stand on my 2 feet here and say, it can be even as simple as, I'm a Chelsea fan. Sometimes I pop that in. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, he's not against being a boy, or like he loves football. And then I can say something like, yeah, when I was 15 years old, I punched myself in the face when I was in Malia because I wanted to get attention from a girl that I liked and she wasn't giving me much attention. I can tell that story and I can stand there and go, I did that. And I'm owning it. And if the boys engage with that, they can actually see and feel and kind of get a sense of what it's like to be honest, to own something and still be someone who is a quote unquote boy. So I feel like that's one piece of the puzzle. I don't know how that all sounds to you.
No, I mean, look, it's in some ways a bit of a trick question because, as you will know better than many, this is just a big cultural soup, right? And there's so many different things to it. But I think There's two of the themes that I think I picked up in your answer there that are on my mind a lot at the moment are role modeling and emotional connection. So one of my episodes coming up is with called Claudio, who's doing a lot of work to get more young men in early years education in teaching roles, because the number of teachers in early years education, so nursery before school, is 3% in the UK. And it gradually climbs until you get to university, where there's a male majority again. But the point is, in those early formative years that you were talking about, there's very little role modeling, and gender norms are being formed about what roles in society women play and what roles in society men play. And so that is, a small example of a way this plays out in our culture that we might not even think about. But the percentage of nursery staff that are men, for example,
Yeah.
is a massive
Yeah.
contributor too.
I would just add to that, because whilst I recognize and resonate with what you're saying about how we need more men in that kind of sector, for example, nursery teachers, just teachers in general, for me, there's another piece to the role modeling, which I think is essential, because we can have more men in these domains, but as men, we may have internalized that man box culture. It's living within us. And there's no shame in that. There really isn't. It's just part of being a human right now at this time. And at the moment, the conversation's been like, whenever I mention that we might have that in us, it kind of activates people. It can activate people in a way of like getting defensive around men and being a man. And I get that. I really do. There's been a lot of attack and judgment on masculinity. I'm not coming at it from that angle. I'm coming at it from a place of curiosity to say that even though if we have more men, there might still be this rigid sense of what it means to be a man.
Yes.
And that to me is at the heart of everything, because the landscape has changed, but we're still giving boys the same map. And the map is leading us into places that no longer work. You used to be able to, my dad used to be able to get the car, get the family and do all of that. And that would be enough. You'd have a sense of a role in society. You'd be doing a job you probably didn't like, but you got on with it. You had a drink in the evenings, at the weekends. I'm just speaking about my dad's story here that we've unpacked together. And that was enough for him at that time. That doesn't work anymore. For a lot of people, it didn't work for me. The gender landscape has shifted. Women are in the workforce. That's one aspect of it. And it's shifted for good reasons. It's needed to evolve. There's been a lot of stuff that has been really harmful to a lot of people, and that's great. And we need to evolve with it. This idea of kind of what it means to be a man. And so, yes, more teachers. However, we also need to be thinking about shifting our understanding of what it means to be a man and just opening up and starting that process. And I don't have the answers there, but I know that it's a process that requires investment on a societal level and on a level where we can provide spaces to facilitate those conversations and actually listen to boys, listen to their struggles, listen to what it's like to be in a world right now as a boy, with everything that's going on, with everything that's changing, and give them permission to actually share that, vocalize it, and feel like they are heard and they are seen, just like every other gender deserves that as well. And so it's bringing that all together so we can evolve. I think that to me is the most important piece. It's evolving the man box.
Yeah, no, fully agree. And I'd love to talk about one of the things that sort of getting in the way of that, and perhaps providing an unhelpful script, which I guess the shorthand phrase that's doing the rounds is the manosphere. I don't know whether you agree we're still using that or not. I mean, we were at an event together a couple of weeks ago where that was the headline. But I guess for those who aren't as immersed in this world as we are, and I don't know, perhaps they see some headlines or that kind of thing, could you just give us a bit of an overview of like what we mean when we say that? What was the subject of the Movember report on young men's health in a digital world, where the short film was made about your experience, which I'll include? Just paint a bit of a picture of what's going on and what do we even mean when we say that.
Yeah. Okay.
That's an easy layup for you there, Will.
No, it's good. I've been thinking a lot about this. So I actually had a post recently on LinkedIn called "Should we stop using the word manosphere?" And I raised a lot of stuff, and I'm just going to try and communicate it now because it got a lot of traction, a lot of people resonating, and a few people kind of activated by it and worried about what I was saying. So I just really want to clarify. So the term manosphere was first kind of born into the world in the kind of 2010s, okay? And it was used originally, and if you Google define it today, it will talk about 4 core communities, right? And your listeners would have heard of some of them. So incels, which is obviously what adolescence was exploring. Red pill, kind of men's rights activism, pickup artists, and MGTOW, men going their own way, okay? And these communities, they do have notable misogyny like throughout them, but it's very hard to define because they're a collection of spaces. They don't all agree with one another, but what tends to tie them together is kind of more, I would say, which is more prominent, which is anti-feminism and anti-wokeness. You can kind of feel that. Sometimes it's more notable, sometimes it's more subtle, under the radar. And then in the case of inceldom, you have more notable misogyny and acts of violence, and sometimes that can actually make its way into real life violence and murder. So it can get very serious and very dark. And at the same time, things have evolved since 2010s. Things have evolved rapidly. You had the rise of someone called Andrew Tate, who I don't even need to introduce. Everyone knows who Andrew Tate is, who in 2022 got about 16 billion views on TikTok, and during COVID was spreading like wildfire in a way that we had never seen before. And all of a sudden you have boys doing these symbols, this kind of hand gesture, which is an Andrew Tate gesture, in workshops, in classes. And everyone was like, wow, what's going on here? And we started to get alerted to the fact, because of someone like Andrew Tate, who's such a provocateur and says things that seem so overtly harmful, that it was like, oh my God, wow, what's going on? A lot of the boys seem to really be looking up to him. And that sparked a lot of conversation that's still going on today. What I say is different is now the term manosphere is kind of being used to describe loads of things. There's not a specific criteria. Is Joe Rogan a manosphere influencer? Is Jordan Peterson a manosphere influencer? You have different outlets calling them certain things. And so it's not clear. And so one of my kind of things that I want to be conscious of is manosphere has become very negative. It's become a negative term because when we think of manosphere, we think of adolescence, we think of these core communities, we think of misogyny. And that is a crucial aspect of this. However, it doesn't tell the whole story. There is a wider lens that I think we need to have if we want to look to addressing what is happening and actually come up with solutions. I got entrenched in the manosphere, quote unquote. A masculinity influencer became a father figure to me, and it started off as self-help. My mental health was in absolute tatters. And all of a sudden I found someone who was saying there was nothing less valued than young men. I felt seen, I felt heard, because I was hearing a lot of anti-male rhetoric at the time that colored my experience of the world. And then this person was making me feel seen. I got guidance. I was hitting my business goals. I felt like I was out of the ditch I was in. And alongside that, there was anti-feminist sentiments happening. There was a kind of rigid worldview I was developing. It was us versus them. Views started to become distorted. You know, the world hates men. I firmly believed that. It was very rigid. And I was, I was in the fight against it. And I felt terrified as well. I didn't want to have any conversations. Now, I didn't make it further than that, really. And there wasn't any violence in my life. There wasn't any extreme hatred. I resented the world. I resented myself. And that did make its way into my relationships with women I was dating at the time. Of course it did. It did. It kind of brought this kind of high value system into my life. So I was subtly devaluing a woman I was dating once. I remember this because she didn't match up to this kind of version I had of being a success. So that's just one way. What I had learned and internalized kind of impacted the way I saw the world, saw women. So there was a lot going on. And ultimately at that time, I was in a very vulnerable place because I was getting guidance and I had a mentor. I had someone to look up to, and I'd never had that before. So there was a lot going on. And there's a real spectrum of responses. Some boys are getting hooked in, like I was, but they're not going down the kind of more extreme places. They're not a part of these core communities. They're watching content that's part of a wider ecosystem that still feeds those ideas. So, and there's also boys that are watching stuff passively. And the danger in kind of framing boys watching online content about self-help or fitness as manosphere content which can happen, is that it means that we lead with judgment, and we lead with this sense of worry and urgency of like, that's toxic, you need to be careful. And I work with so many parents who ask me, who's the good guys and who's the bad guys? And the truth is, who knows? At
Yeah.
times it's obvious.
Yeah.
You know, you can look at Andrew Tate and you can go, okay, that's probably, yeah, maybe you could use him for gym motivation. But if you're a parent, you probably don't want your child watching Andrew Tate. I get it. But it's a lot blurry. There's far more than Andrew Tate out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember being in a room at a business conference where this topic was being discussed. It was sort of a round table. And even me as a 38-year-old male, people were talking about, you know, deplatforming Joe Rogan and these idiots who listen to him. And I was like, I don't agree with everything he says, and I don't agree with, you know, some of the guests he has on. But like, you have to appreciate the breadth of his audience and the topics that he discusses. And if you like hunting and martial arts, for example, you might be a fan and be able to say, oh yeah, but I'm not going to listen to that one where he's, you know, promoting and platforming a climate change skeptic, for example. And I think after the session, a couple of guys came up to me and were like, oh, I'm glad you said something, actually, because I almost don't want to admit that I listen to that stuff now. And there's this risk, these are guys in their 30s and 40s, right? And as you say, there's this risk, is if we label everything, you just, you know, the risk, I imagine you'll know better than me, is that you continue to push boys and men further down the rabbit hole.
Well, you just said it right there. That guy that really jumped out. I almost didn't want to say or admit that I watched that now. This is a grown man. Did I hear that correct?
Yeah.
You said that, yeah. So imagine now amplifying the insecurity and the fear of judgment by, I don't know, 10, 20, 100. You're a 14, 15-year-old boy.
Yeah.
If you get any ilk that you're going to be judged, your parents are like concerned that you're going to be radicalized into a misogynist. That does happen. As I'm having this conversation, I just want to clarify, I understand that happens. And in inviting and widening the lens, I'm not talking about removing or denying the harm. I'm talking about understanding how we can talk about the harm in a way that makes it visible and understandable to young boys and men. That is at the heart of prevention. So I'm not working against feminism or the effort for women and girls. This is, in essence, going to benefit women and girls, because I am someone that was on that pipeline myself. I can see how there are, in some cases, how it goes further and it gets more extreme and it can lead to that. But it didn't for me, because I was able to have conversations where I didn't feel judged. And in not feeling judged, I expressed, yeah, this is what I'm watching. I'm doing this, I'm watching that. And I started to be able to process it. Because when I was in my room watching it by myself, I wasn't having any conversations. So I had kind of half-baked views and opinions because I wasn't having conversations. I wasn't reflecting too deeply. I was absorbing this information passively for a number of reasons. The algorithm was feeding it to me. It was a source of distraction from the pain I was feeling. It was addictive. I felt seen. I felt heard. I was getting guidance. I also found it entertaining. There's a variety of reasons to be hooked on it. But that is really important for us to recognize, because I often find I'm living in this tension between an academic world that really wants to name harm with clarity and the kind of felt reality of so many boys that often feel suspicious, judged, and dismissed. And it's like, we need to hold both. We need to be able to kind of learn how to name systems of harm, like the man box, for example, in a way that still keeps the person's humanity intact. And the words we use are really important, which is why I raised that question. Should we use the word manosphere? Just like the term toxic masculinity had the opposite effect of starting conversations around the harmful aspects of masculinity, it became something that felt judgmental. And so, although it may be intended in different ways, and I see this language all the time in the media just ran a campaign called, we're now going to run anti-misogynistic or anti-misogyny classes to tackle toxic masculinity. I mean, that whole sentence is just completely rooted in this problem-oriented way of looking at things. It's looking at the harm and it's bringing in that judgment. And so it just doesn't work. And it's always written by people that I sense, and I could be wrong here, but that haven't been in a classroom and attempted to have conversations with boys about this stuff. Because as someone who has done that so many times now, I can tell you, it is bloody hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. If you go in there in a lecturing mode and you start talking about patriarchy and misogyny and how we need to be better, we need to do this, you need to consider this, the boys, in my experience, will shut down, disengage, huff and puff, do a bit of this. Not all boys, mind you. Now, to play devil's advocate, okay, but it's meant to be uncomfortable. That's what I hear a lot. I'm just trying to, evaluate.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Will, it's meant to be uncomfortable. Change is meant to be uncomfortable. And to that I say, agreed. It is going to be uncomfortable. But if we're so uncomfortable that we're disengaging, that's not useful either.
Yeah. And the other thing is, in my experience, you don't shame people into change either, right? You can provide them with knowledge, you can give them a path, but like people aren't going to change from a position of defensiveness and shame.
Right. Agreed. I think that only gets me, it's only got me so far when I shame myself into change.
Yeah.
I think in the long run, just from my own experience, what has helped me is just to gain an understanding of what I'm caught up in, to have empathy for myself. And then actually, when I received empathy and was able to offer it to myself, that's when empathy opened up for other people. And I started to realize that I have something very similar in me, that I want to be seen and I want to be heard. And I remember, during my journey, because I'd never been friends with gay men before. I'd never met a non-binary person before. And this happened in my journey of recovery in this support group. I remember going up to this non-binary person, and when we were becoming friends, I said, I'm really scared to misgender you. Really scared. I feel like that you're going to hate me, or, because I'm a man. And they basically said, that's interesting, because I'm scared that you're not going to like me because I'm not a man. And I was like, wow. And it was just this like pin drop moment where I thought, oh my God, we're both scared. And we hung out in our fear, and I just watched it simmer away. And I realized that the online world was definitely exacerbating and allowing me to feel more distant and, more different, let's say, from a person that had this word non-binary that they were identifying as a non-binary. And that word itself became a kind of like, you're a part of a tribe that doesn't like my tribe. And it was just so tribal. And that's why I try to help people understand here, that it's not rational. We're talking about something very tribal. Like when I developed an attachment to this masculinity influencer, he filled a void in my psyche that was so emotional. He worked its way into every conversation I was having with people. I was learning everything he was saying, reading the book, watching the podcast, painting of him on my wall. He was my dad. Yeah. And so if you came and like wanted to have a discussion about how he was toxic and how you disagree with what he's saying, oh my God, instantly I felt so threatened.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't about, even if you had some really good points, I felt like you were threatening this attachment that I had.
Yeah. I do want to come. I mean, there's so much you've said there that we could go after, and I want to put a pin in the work you're doing with schools next, just to paint a picture of what is going on out there. But before we move on, I do also want to acknowledge something that is clear in the film and in the reports and from your own story, is that partly how people get hooked on this is that it works. It serves a purpose, right? Up to a point. I mean, you say that you'd built a house without any foundations, right? And when it was challenged, it came crumbling down. But like the advice often comes from a good place, like how to get fit. I think everyone would agree it's good to be fit, how to be successful, et cetera, et cetera. And they're up to a point, people, men and boys, are getting what they need from it. And Richard Reeves, I don't know if you saw, who wrote Of Boys and Men, he wrote a Substack lately saying, actually, young men and boys are feeling positive about how things are going, and that's sort of separate from like what they're absorbing. But there is a feeling, I would assume, at the start of this journey of positivity, of like finally some good advice, a welcoming space, and I guess that's the insidiousness of it, is that it works up to a point. It makes you feel good up until a point.
Yeah, I remember feeling great. Yeah, I mean, this isn't the online world, the manosphere. I'll keep using that term because I know it's where we currently are using it, but I'm just bringing that awareness that I have to it. But the manosphere, it exacerbates existing, or it highlights, amplifies existing cultural ideas around what it means to be a man. Like these ideas predate the manosphere. Obviously, there's other stuff and other language and other things that get added through the online medium, trolling and all of these forums and anonymity and the memes. Yeah, that's all there. But the ideas that I ingested around what it means to be a man, how to hold myself, how to move through the world, how to feel better about myself by taking care of my body with, fitness and getting big and yeah, building a business and running a business and earning money and attracting a fit girlfriend, all of that stuff. I mean, most men will be able to relate to wanting those things. I mean, every time I do a workshop with the boys and I say, these were my 3 goals in my 20s, get a big and ripped, build a business into a huge success, get a fit girlfriend. They all go, some of them like nod, they do all that. Yeah, yeah. And it's like, yeah,
yeah.
You can understand why I've got this, because this isn't just about what it means to be a man, but it's our capitalist society. There's something quite capitalistic, if that makes sense, about it. And it really does feel like that is going to reap the most immediate reward. So many of us now have kind of lost motivation to go down the traditional economic school route of, getting a job, because it just feels like there's no hope with that. But if you, build your muscles, maybe build a business, get into some crypto, whatever it might be, and you attract a fit girlfriend, that feels like, yeah, immediately I'm going to start feeling something. Immediately. And it's prescriptive. That's tangible. I know I can go to the gym. I just buy the membership. I do this, I do that, right? Build a business. I can find a course. Whereas what's the alternative? Like, the alternative is a lot less clearer. The alternative at the moment, from what I can see in conversations with boys, is meditate and then maybe see a therapist.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't know what the pathway is to emotional maturity, because it's harder to sell. Emotional maturity is harder to sell because in the short term, it sucks. You're feeling feelings. You're facing yourself, you're putting down your phone, you're getting outside, you're opening up to someone, taking a risk, you're getting hurt in the process. Like, it's messy, and it's not as tangible and prescriptive. Obviously, this is at the heart of my work, which is, how can I sell, let's call it emotional maturity. How can I sell emotional maturity, promote it in a way that is understandable, so it motivates boys and men to go down that path? Because the truth is, the benefits, oh my God, man, I cannot describe to you the benefit of feeling emotionally stable. Like, I used to have panic attacks every day. I used to wake up in the morning and feel like, oh, another day. Am I going to have a panic attack? How am I going to get through this? I haven't felt that way in 5 years, 6 years now. I cannot describe to you how grateful I am for that. The capacity to feel joy has come back. These are all just a couple of things. And, having friendships that I feel are genuinely close again. We spoke about only feeling that closeness when we're like 6 years old. I've felt that closeness with my friends in small pockets, and to be surrounded by friends like that is insane. My dad, the relationship I have with him now is, I cannot describe to you how different it is. I just uploaded a WhatsApp voice note on my Instagram because he sent me this voice note the other day. It was just him checking in. Something like, hey, Will, it's just Dad. And I was like, okay, here we go. Some sort of logistical thing, some reason he's calling me, right? And he didn't come. He just goes, just checking in. And yeah, that's it really. Just wanted to hear how you are. All right, love you. Bye. And I was like, and I just continually am amazed by how things are changing between me and him, and how we are more connected. And it's learning that language of connection. And it starts with connecting with the self. But it's just, it's a fucking tragedy. I really feel like it's a fucking tragedy that so many of us, we learn to cut ourselves off from all these other aspects of who we are.
Yeah.
And we never explore. We never go through that process when you're a kid where you should be exploring, trying out Dungeons and Dragons, wearing pink leggings and having a dance. These are just ways that I've explored.
Yeah.
In recent, my friend, one of my best friends, he bought me a dress for my 30th. He bought me a dress from Zara. And I mean, look, rationally, I'm saying I want to explore. I do want to explore. I've still got such a big block in exploring myself. I'm doing this more and more, but this was one of those moments. He goes, come on, he was trying to challenge me to explore, right? Step outside the man box. And I just was like, really? We want to put on these dresses? And he went, yeah, go on. And I was like, all right, I'll do it for one song. Okay.
Yeah.
So I put on the dress and I'm telling this story to my dad. My dad's just like looking like he's got, covered in bird shit or something. He's like, why? Why are you doing this? My dad's in his 60s, just kind of, but it was amazing. We're having this chat and I'm telling him, I'm like, Dad, for me, it was just about challenging that internal barrier that I think cuts me off from just fucking expressing myself and having a laugh. We're on this rock hurtling through the cosmos here for a finite period of time. Why don't I just wear a dress and just have a laugh? So I did. And, I did it for more than one song. It was a few songs and it felt great. I felt for a few moments. And
Yeah,
then I
yeah,
felt awkward and I was like, right, but that's enough for today, and I took it
yeah.
off and I've still got that dress and who knows, it might come out
Yeah.
again at one point. But that's just an example of me of like asking myself, God, how much else am I cutting myself off from
Uh,
exploring and expressing and ultimately feeling alive, bringing in that
uh,
aliveness? Because I've relied so long, Tim, I've relied so long on having a woman being in a romantic relationship to provide me with all the aliveness of a lifetime, to
uh,
provide me with that life force of like, yes, I can't wait. And don't get me wrong, that is an intricate part of being alive, I feel, love
yeah,
and
for sure.
being in a romantic relationship. But it can't be the only thing I'm relying on. That's what I realize now. And because it just never can provide me with the aliveness I'm talking about. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, that's beautiful, man. And yeah, even the karaoke in the dress, that's one I wish I was there for. But you're right,
Well, maybe one day, bud.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That's probably a good segue into sort of how you're spending your time now then, right? Given the tragedy of connectedness that you've outlined. We've mentioned empath a few times in the conversation. What are you doing now? How are you spending your time? And what are you seeing as you go out and challenge some of these narratives that we've discussed?
Well, I'm going to be really honest. I feel cool to kind of usually when I do these interviews, I kind of give the kind of professional Will version, right?
Mhm.
And I don't know why, but the vibe that we've got going on here, I'm just going to be honest. I'm going to tell you a bit about that, but also just where I'm at, like spiritually, emotionally, what I'm working on, what's
Please.
coming up for me. Cause I think it's all a part of it. So within my work, I am running MPath and we're starting to get more and more work in schools, delivering workshops, talks, staff CPD on understanding the manosphere, approaching conversations with boys, workshops on empathy, masculinity, mental health. And we're just constantly evolving these. I'm getting more and more facilitators. So if you are interested in this line of work, do reach out to me. That goes to you, that goes to anyone.
Yeah,
And
great.
yeah, so that's more and more works coming in there. And then I'm also writing a book. I'm in the process of writing a book on the masculinity crisis, how to understand the manosphere, what is going on, and approach conversations with boys and men. I'm also interweaving my own story of being online, of going into schools, and I'm interweaving it with lots of professional and expert advice and stories. And yeah, so that's a big project that I've got going on at the moment. And then of course I'm a psychotherapist as well, right? So I work with men and women, and that is my bread and butter. So that's kind of me in a nutshell professionally. And my goal, I guess, to wrap that up, my intention there is to quite simply offer people a roadmap to emotional maturity. If I had to condense it, and I've also got an Instagram account now, and I'm just putting bits and bobs out there like that and just continue to share what has brought me to where I am now. But where am I? Am I happy? Okay, because all right, Will, you've gone on about emotional maturity, and you're presenting it as if you're this emotionally mature person.
Yeah.
And the truth is, obviously I'm 31 years old. I'm young. I'm still very much going through this initiation, you could call it, into emotional maturity. And there are parts of me that feel really at peace with me, that feel proud of me, that feel ease. And there are some parts of me that are holding pain, lots of pain still. And particularly when it comes to being in a romantic relationship. And I'm finally in a position now where I'm ready to face that. And I'm talking primarily about anxious attachment. And I've got a lot of that within my system. A lot of a lot of loneliness, a lot of grief. There's a boy in me that's just, fucking hell, man. He's been needing a lot of love, a lot of
Uh,
love. And as people know, when we go dating, it can open all of that up. It really can. And I've never really felt able to work through that and take responsibility for it myself. I've always unconsciously kind of given that responsibility to the person that I might be engaged with romantically to kind of soothe that boy. And so for the first time now, with all the tools that I have, the awareness, the support I've got, and just my capacity to insource, to offer myself compassion from the adult part of me in that moment where I am freaking out has been incredibly valuable and challenging. And so that is something within my life now that I really would like. You mentioned that you've got 2 children, and that fills me with just real warmth and also sadness and longing because I'm like, that's the next step for me, is building a home with someone where I can build a family. And
Mm.
yeah, my goal is to be a good dad. That really is something that I think trumps everything. I just heard Scotty Scheffler, number one golfer in the world, say this in a press conference day or two ago. Just, I'd rather be a good dad than a good golfer. And that made me cry. It really did bring tears to my eyes because I've always seen myself as a dad. And that is something that I long for. So that just gives you an insight into, yes, I'm stable. There's so many wonderful things going on in my life with my friends, my family, my work. And I'm deeply unhappy in certain ways as well. Like, and I say deeply unhappy just because that longing is deep, that longing for community, for intimate community, to feel a part of something. And I've moved to St. Leonard's by the sea, a small town, and I'm building that community here slowly but surely. I'm building it. And at the same time, I'm building it whilst still longing for something else. And maybe that longing won't ever go away. Maybe I'll have a family, I'll have some kids, and maybe you can actually feed back to me on this if you have anything to feed back. But because the grass is always greener on the other side, possibly.
Yeah.
But I also
Yeah.
do still want that stuff. And so
Yeah.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
sitting with at the moment.
Well, look, I mean, you've role modeled some amazing self-awareness and vulnerability in sharing that, and thank you for doing it. And I'd just offer back to you that, given everything you've gone through and the work you've done, you're building the house on solid foundations this time, right? To hark back to the phrase you used before in the film, and wherever that gets you, you should take pride and comfort in that, because there are many men, trust me, that I've worked with in my coaching, or I know from this work, who maybe they have the kids, maybe they have the community, but that house is on shaky foundations. Part of all of this is that sometimes that house just about stays up for a really long time, and sometimes it comes crumbling down, and we can never know, right? We can only do what we can to what we're building for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm grateful. I'm definitely grateful to feel that more stability.
Uh,
And some days it definitely doesn't feel stable. The truth is, when I'm going through those kind of unstable moments, there is this undercurrent of just trust that it will
uh,
pass. And I never used to have
uh,
that. Trauma, one of the things it does is it kind of warps our sense of time. And when we're submerged in, a past wound, it can really reduce our capacity to see that this is just a moment. This is a moment in time. It will be over. It feels like it's going to go on forever. And I just have so much empathy now. That's what I will finish by saying, is just that I really do feel like whatever has happened to me, however I've got to this point, I was someone that really didn't have empathy for, or didn't have the capacity to be empathetic towards the struggles of other people, when I thought the struggles of men and boys just really wasn't being acknowledged or seen. Whereas now it is very different. And on that aspect, I just have so much empathy for everyone. Honestly, for everyone involved. I can look at women and girls and go, oh my goodness, if I have a daughter, man, I can understand why people would be scared. I get
uh,
it. I get why parents are scared. I work with so many parents and I really do understand that. I can have so much empathy for how much we need to support boys and girls. And also any other kind of gender, sexuality. The more I've become friends with people that have these different perspectives, I'm friends with someone who's trans, non-binary. I've also got a friend that's gay, a couple of friends that are gay. I got really close to them. And that's been so interesting, kind of exposing myself to different experiences, because
uh,
it makes it more real. And when
uh,
something's real, when someone's there telling you what it's like to be them, you can't not have empathy for them. But it happened because I knew I wasn't going to be judged in this environment. And that kind of space that we connect with people is so important. And then vice versa, that empathy is of course there for boys and men. I know
yeah,
exactly what it feels like to have that resentment towards the world and to feel disconnected. Yeah, and parents and staff, we are all in this together. We really are. And yeah, and it can feel like we're not. It can feel like we're up against it. It can feel all these things. But I am very hopeful, and maybe I'm a romantic optimist. Call me that if you like. But I do see that it is possible in those moments where I go into a school and a boy
uh,
comes up to me after a talk, and he looks around really sheepishly. I can tell him just being there is him stepping out of his comfort zone.
yeah,
And then he might come over to me and he'll look down on the ground and he'll say something like, thank you. And I'm like, wow,
yeah,
I can really feel that thank you. And then they might say something like, when you were talking about going to the gym to build self-worth. Yeah. I'm doing that right now. How do I build self-worth? And it's just like, I feel so moved by that. I'm a sensitive guy. I'm so moved by it. And I can tell something real has happened, so I say to the boy, you are building self-worth right now by sharing this with me, because you're opening up and you're showing yourself that you're worth caring for by getting that out there. And in this particular occasion, the boy just had a real smile on his face. We shook hands and it just felt like something real had happened. And when I see that, fairly regular enough for me to continue doing the work.
Yeah.
Because you need to know that you're heading in that direction. And it just brings me with so much hope. This is possible. We are talking about it, and let's continue the conversation.
Amazing. Well, look, I will call you a romantic optimist, and I do that in the most positive way, because I think we need all voices in this, and we need optimistic voices just as much as we need others. So yeah, as a parent of a boy and a girl, and as someone trying to contribute to, I just want to thank you for channeling your experience into something positive to impact others, and for doing the work that you're doing, and of course for coming on the podcast today, and being as vulnerable as you have. Is there anything that you'd want to draw anyone's attention to in terms of your work, or how to connect if they've enjoyed the conversation we've had?
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate this. You can go to my website, www.willadolphy.com. There you might want to watch the documentary I did that you referred to, or that thing might be in the show notes, or
it'll
the
be in the show notes. Yeah.
Great. You can also just check out my writing. I have a Substack. It's on my website. I've got a book coming out, and an Instagram at PsychWill. Reach out. Anyone, if you want to connect, I'm always open to hearing your perspective.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Well, I'll put all of that in the show notes. And once again, Will, thanks for everything you've shared today, the work that you're doing, and keep up the good fight, man.
Thanks, dude. See you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
So there you go. What an amazing conversation with Will. He was such a good sport in sharing so much of his own story. I think, as he rightly said, too often we can make this feel academic with research about boys feeling this or young men finding that. And when you actually hear that story brought to life, you see how easily it can happen, and how far down a negative path it can take people. I'm super happy that he's chosen to spend his time doing the work he's doing, and everything that we mentioned will be in the show notes if you want to get involved in the work that he's doing with MPath as well. So, as always, if something in that episode resonated with you, please do like, subscribe, and share it with someone else who might need to hear it. That's how this movement will grow, man by man, story by story. As always, work hard, be kind, and I will catch you on the next one.